The Galactic Institute of Advanced Computing stood as a gleaming beacon of technological superiority, its quantum crystal architecture stretching impossibly upward through the purple-tinged atmosphere of New Genesis Prime. The building itself was a testament to the collaborative achievement of 17 different species, 16 species, and those peculiar humans who had somehow managed to stumble their way into interstellar travel with their primitive binary computing systems. Professor Zixthrax adjusted his fourth sensory appendage as he glided into his classroom, his translucent skin reflecting the morning light in subtle patterns that conveyed his mild annoyance. Another term, another batch of the galaxy's brightest minds, and another human student to deal with. He'd already memorized the class roster, including one Marcus Chen, who had somehow scored high enough on the entrance exams to warrant admission. Probably got lucky with multiple choice, Zixthrax muttered to himself, his skin flickering with patterns of amusement that set his teaching assistants tittering. The classroom itself was a marvel of modern engineering, with neural interfaces at each station and quantum holographic displays that could render complex computational models in 11 dimensions. The students filed in, proud Arcturians with their crystalline bodies housing vast neural networks, elegant Valaxians whose binary star system had given birth to trinary computing, and even a couple of gaseous Zephyrians who could process information through their entire being. And then there was Marcus Chen, walking in with nothing but an ancient datapad that probably still used semiconductors, of all things. The human took his seat at the back of the class, either oblivious to or ignoring the ripple of derision that passed through the other students' various forms of communication. "Welcome," Zixthrax began, his voice modulator perfectly calibrated to reach all auditory perception ranges, "to advanced computational theory and practice. You represent the top 0.001% of your respective species' intellectual capacity." His skin flickered briefly to the ultraviolet spectrum. "Most of you, anyway." The class tittered again and Marcus continued tapping away at his datapad, apparently taking notes in what Zixthrax could only assume was that absurdly simple Base 2 system humans seemed so fond of. "This term, we will be exploring computational methodologies that transcend traditional mathematical frameworks. We will bend the very fabric of space-time to process information, commune with quantum superpositions, and learn to think beyond the linear constraints of conventional logic." As Zixthrax spoke, the classroom's holographic system sprang to life, displaying a cascade of complex equations that spiraled through the air in beautiful patterns. Every student's neural interface automatically began processing and storing the information, except for Marcus, who was still pecking away at his datapad like some ancient scribe. "For those of you who might find the standard curriculum challenging," Zixthrax's skin pulsed with barely concealed condescension, "we do offer remedial classes in basic quantum computing, though I'm afraid we don't have anything quite as rudimentary as binary systems in our course catalogue." The laughter that followed was polite but pointed. Marcus finally looked up from his datapad, and to Zixthrax's surprise, the human was smiling. Not the uncomfortable smile of someone who knew they were out of their depth, but the confident smile of someone who knew something others didn't. Zixthrax felt his chromatophores twist with irritation. He'd dealt with human students before, and they all had that same inexplicable confidence, right up until they crashed and burned. Well, this term would be no different. After all, how far could someone really go with just zeros and ones? "Today's challenge," Professor Zixthrax announced 3 weeks into the term, his skin rippling with educational enthusiasm, "is to solve the quantum entanglement optimization problem for a 7th-dimensional hypercube." His appendages gestured gracefully, causing the holographic display to burst into a complex lattice of interconnected probability matrices. The other students immediately connected to their neural interfaces, their various biological and technological adaptations humming with computational power. The Arcturians' crystalline forms began resonating at frequencies designed to match quantum fluctuations, while the Valaxians split their consciousness across parallel processing streams. And then there was Marcus Chen, who raised his hand. "Yes, Mr. Chen." Zixthrax's voice modulator couldn't quite hide his exasperation. "Do you need the problem simplified? Perhaps we could start with a cube in regular space-time." "Actually, Professor," Marcus said, still tapping away at his datapad, "I was wondering if I could present my solution first." The classroom fell silent. Even the gaseous Zephyrians condensed slightly in surprise. You have a solution already. Zixithrax's skin cycled through several shades of disbelief. Mr. Chen, I haven't even finished explaining the parameters of the— Oh, I've been working on it since you mentioned it last week, Marcus interrupted, standing up with his datapad. I wrote a binary algorithm that— Binary? The word escaped Zixithrax's speech synthesizer as more of a screech than a word. You attempted to solve a quantum entanglement problem using binary. The classroom erupted in various forms of alien laughter. A young Arcturian's crystalline form nearly shattered from the vibrations of their amusement. Perhaps, Mr. Chen, Zixithrax continued, his skin now pulsing with patterns that conveyed both amusement and pity. You misunderstood the fundamental nature of quantum computing. You see, binary can only process information in discrete states, on or off, 1 or 0. Quantum computing deals with superpositions, with states that exist in multiple— I know how quantum computing works, Professor, Marcus said, his smile unwavering. I just thought— You thought? Zixithrax's fourth appendage twitched violently. Mr. Chen, what you're suggesting is akin to trying to map the entire galactic core using nothing but an abacus. It's like attempting to translate the collected works of the 100-minded poets of Beetlejuice using only emojis. It's like— Would you like to see my solution? Marcus asked quietly. The professor's skin flickered with such intense patterns of derision that 3 teaching assistants had to adjust their optical filters. By all means, Mr. Chen, please enlighten us all on how you've revolutionized computational theory with your zeros and ones. Marcus walked to the front of the classroom, his ancient datapad looking particularly primitive next to the quantum holographic display. He began explaining his approach, using terms that seemed absurdly simple compared to the usual quantum mechanical vocabulary of the class. You see, by breaking down the 7th-dimensional structure into parallel binary trees, we can— Enough! Zixithrax's interruption came with a flash of ultraviolet light that made everyone wince. Mr. Chen, this is not some primitive Earth programming course. This is advanced computational theory at the Galactic Institute. Your solution isn't just wrong, it's an insult to the very principles of advanced computing. The classroom had grown tense. The Valaxians were exchanging nervous quantum packets of information, while the Zephyrians had expanded to their anxiety state. But sir, Marcus persisted, if you just look at the results— I don't need to look at the results to know that you cannot solve a quantum problem with binary code. Zixithrax's skin was now cycling through colors so quickly it looked like a malfunctioning display. Return to your seat, Mr. Chen. I suggest you spend less time tinkering with obsolete methods and more time studying actual quantum computing principles, and perhaps consider that remedial class I mentioned. As Marcus walked back to his seat, datapad clutched tightly in his hands. The other students watched with a mixture of pity and second-hand embarrassment, but those closest to him noticed something odd. He was still smiling, and now he was typing faster than ever. Since Mr. Chen's interesting interpretation of computational methodology has taken up valuable class time, Professor Zixithrax announced, his skin now a steady pulse of academic superiority, I believe this presents us with an excellent opportunity for a practical demonstration. The professor's appendages danced across the quantum interface, and the holographic display erupted into a sprawling web of interconnected equations. The mathematical structure was so complex that several students had to activate additional neural processors just to perceive it in its entirety. This, Zixithrax proclaimed with evident satisfaction, is the Riemann zeta manifestation in a 13-dimensional probability space, complicated by quantum uncertainty principles and overlaid with non-Euclidean topological constraints. His skin flickered with what could only be described as academic sadism. You have until the end of this session to solve it. And to make things interesting, whoever provides the correct solution first will be exempt from the midterm examinations. The classroom burst into activity. The crystalline Arcturians began vibrating at frequencies that could shatter lesser materials, their neural networks processing countless calculations per nanosecond. The Valaxians entered their trinary processing state, their consciousness scattered across multiple probability streams. Even the gaseous Zephyrians condensed into their most computationally efficient forms, their very molecules rearranging to maximize processing power. And in the back of the room, Marcus Chen pulled out his datapad and began typing. "Oh, and Mr. Chen," Zixthrax added, his voice modulator dripping with false concern, "feel free to use the classroom's neural interface instead of your charming antique. We wouldn't want you to be at a disadvantage." Marcus nodded politely but continued typing. The soft click-click-click of his physical keyboard seemed absurdly primitive compared to the quantum hum of advanced computing that filled the room. An hour passed. The Arcturians had formed a computational consensus network, their crystalline bodies linked in a complex matrix of shared processing power. The Valaxians had already gone through 3 different probability streams, each more complex than the last. The Zephyrians had achieved their highest density state, usually reserved for solving grand unified field equations. 2 hours passed. The first signs of strain began to show. One of the Arcturians had to disconnect from the consensus network, their crystal structure showing signs of computational fatigue. A Valaxian had become trapped in a recursive probability loop and had to be helped back to base consciousness by a teaching assistant. 3 hours passed. The quantum hum had died down to a worried whine. The Zephyrians had expanded back to their normal gaseous state, their molecules exhausted from the computational effort. Even the teaching assistants were showing signs of neural interface fatigue. And still, Marcus typed. 30 minutes remaining, Zixthrax announced, his skin patterns showing the first signs of genuine curiosity. He had expected the human to give up hours ago, yet there he sat, still tapping away at his primitive device with unwavering focus. The other students began stealing glances at Marcus. The steady rhythm of his typing had become almost hypnotic against the background of failing quantum calculations and neural interface errors. Several students had already given up, their various sensory appendages drooping with exhaustion. 15 minutes, Zixthrax called out. His fourth appendage was twitching again, but now it seemed less like irritation and more like uncertainty. Marcus's typing speed suddenly increased. His fingers flew across the keyboard in a blur, and for the first time his ever-present smile had been replaced with an expression of intense concentration. 10 minutes. The remaining active students were now openly staring at Marcus. The sound of his typing had become the only noise in the room, a steady staccato rhythm that seemed to be building towards something. 5 minutes. Marcus sat up straight, his fingers still moving, but now with a different pattern, like he was checking something, reviewing his work. 1 minute. The human's hand moved to the center of his datapad, hovering over what appeared to be an ancient enter key. The entire class held their breath, or their equivalent respiratory functions, as they watched. "Time's up," Zixthrax announced, his skin pulsing with what he hoped was triumphant finality. "Please submit your solutions to the quantum holographic display for evaluation." The remaining students began transferring their partial solutions, their various appendages and interfaces moving with the sluggishness of computational exhaustion. And then Marcus Chen pressed enter. The quantum holographic display flickered as it processed the incoming data streams. The partial solutions from the alien students manifested as complex multidimensional structures floating in the air, each one incomplete yet showcasing advanced computational methods. Then Marcus's solution appeared. At first the display seemed to struggle with the input, as if confused by its apparent simplicity. Then the binary code began to unfold, transforming into a beautiful cascade of perfectly aligned mathematical structures. The 13-dimensional space-time manifold that had seemed so impossibly complex was now being elegantly mapped out in a series of nested binary trees, each branch splitting reality into its most fundamental states: yes or no, 1 or 0, true or false. Professor Zixthrax's skin went completely transparent, a sign of extreme shock in his species. This is impossible," he muttered, his voice modulator crackling with disbelief. "The quantum holographic display must be malfunctioning." His appendages flew across the control interface, running diagnostic after diagnostic. "It's not malfunctioning, Professor," Marcus said, standing up. "Would you like me to explain how it works?" The professor's skin began rapidly cycling through colors as his appendages continued to verify the results. "Please," he finally managed, his voice modulator barely maintaining coherence. "Enlighten us." Marcus walked to the front of the room, his datapad in hand. The key was realizing that even quantum uncertainty can be expressed as a series of binary decisions. Instead of trying to process all quantum states simultaneously, I broke them down into parallel binary decision trees. He connected his datapad to the display, and new patterns began emerging. See, here's where I mapped the quantum uncertainty principle to a binary probability matrix. Each potential state is assigned a binary flag, and the program runs through all possible combinations using a recursive algorithm I designed. The class watched in stunned silence as Marcus continued his explanation. The Arcturians had completely stopped vibrating. The Valaxians had synchronized all their consciousness streams to focus on the presentation. Even the Zephyrians had achieved perfect molecular stability, a rare state of complete attention for their species. The non-Euclidean topological constraints were actually the easiest part, Marcus continued, pulling up another section of his code. Once you understand that every curve, no matter how complex, can be approximated by a series of binary choices about which direction to move next, it's just a matter of optimization. But the processing power required, one of the teaching assistants interjected. The number of calculations. Oh, that's where the beauty of binary comes in, Marcus smiled. Instead of trying to hold all states in superposition like quantum computing does, my algorithm makes decisive binary choices at each step, pruning impossible branches early and focusing computational power where it's actually needed. It's like, imagine trying to catch a quantum particle by flooding the entire room with probability fields, when you could instead play an elaborate game of 20 questions with reality itself. Professor Zixthrax had regained enough composure for his skin to return to its normal translucency, but his fourth appendage was practically tying itself in knots. The verification process, it confirms your solution is correct, but surely there must be some mistake. The method is too simple, Marcus suggested. Professor, humans learned long ago that complexity isn't always the answer. We spent centuries working with binary, finding ways to break down impossibly complex problems into series of simple yes-no questions. We didn't have quantum computing or neural interfaces, so we had to get creative. He pulled up one final display showing the elegant efficiency of his code. Your quantum computer tries to solve everything at once by embracing uncertainty. My code solves it by asking the right questions in the right order, different paths, same destination. The verification process continued running in the background, each new test confirming what seemed increasingly undeniable. Marcus's binary solution wasn't just correct, it was optimal. The program had found the shortest path through the 13-dimensional probability space, mapped the non-Euclidean topology perfectly, and resolved all quantum uncertainties with an efficiency that even quantum computers struggled to match. But it's just ones and zeros, Professor Zixthrax whispered, his voice modulator barely audible. Yes, Marcus agreed, just ones and zeros, but so is everything, if you look deep enough. Even quantum superposition is just uncertainty about whether something is a 1 or a 0 until you measure it. My code doesn't try to maintain that uncertainty, it systematically resolves it, one binary decision at a time. The final verification complete, the quantum holographic display showed one last analysis. Marcus's solution was 23% more efficient than the theoretical best-case quantum computing approach. The binary code, in its beautiful simplicity, had outperformed the most advanced computational methods in the galaxy. Professor Zixthrax spent the next week poring over Earth's computational history, his skin cycling through shades of fascination as he discovered the ingenuity of human binary computing. His quarters became cluttered with ancient texts about Boolean algebra, binary trees, and the fundamental principles of classical computing. They built quantum computers without quantum computers, he muttered to his teaching assistants during a late-night study session. While we were developing ways to harness quantum uncertainty, they were finding ways to eliminate it entirely. How did we miss this? The next class session began differently. The quantum holographic display wasn't showing complex probability matrices or quantum equations. Instead, it displayed a simple image. ENIAC, Earth's first general-purpose electronic computer. Class, Zixthrax began, his skin pulsing with the soft blues of humility. Today we're going to learn about alternative approaches to computational theory. Mr. Chen, would you please join me at the front? Marcus walked forward, datapad in hand, as the professor continued. Humans didn't have the luxury of quantum computing or neural interfaces. They couldn't tap into probability fields or manipulate space-time. They had electricity, simple switches, and binary code. And yet, his fourth appendage gestured at the solution still floating in the corner of the display. And yet they learned to solve problems we thought impossible without quantum technology. The Arcturians' crystalline forms hummed with curiosity. The Valaxians, for once, consolidated all their consciousness streams to focus on a single topic. The Zephyrians condensed slightly, their gaseous forms showing unusual stability. Mr. Chen's solution wasn't just a mathematical achievement, Zixthrax continued. It was a reminder that there's more than one way to approach a problem. While we were building bigger quantum computers, humans were building smarter algorithms. While we embraced uncertainty, they mastered certainty. Marcus began explaining the history of human computing, from mechanical calculators to modern binary systems. He showed how humans had developed sorting algorithms, search trees, and optimization techniques that could rival quantum systems through sheer clever design. The binary system taught us discipline, Marcus explained. When you can only work with ones and zeros, you learn to break down complex problems into their smallest possible components. You learn to be efficient because you have to be. A young Arcturian raised a crystalline appendage. But doesn't the limitation of binary states make it harder to process complex quantum interactions? Actually, Marcus smiled, pulling up his code again, it makes it easier in some ways. Instead of trying to track all possible quantum states simultaneously, we create decision trees that efficiently eliminate impossible states. It's like solving a maze. You don't need to be everywhere at once if you have a good strategy for choosing which path to take next. The class began to shift from skepticism to genuine interest. Soon, students were asking Marcus to review their own solutions, looking for ways to incorporate binary efficiency into their quantum algorithms. The Valaxians discovered that binary decision trees could optimize their probability stream calculations. The Zephyrians found that binary flags could help them maintain molecular cohesion during complex computations. Professor Zixthrax watched this transformation with his skin glowing in the warm patterns of pride. Not the artificial pride of assumed superiority, but the genuine pride of a teacher watching real learning take place. Perhaps, he announced near the end of class, we've been approaching the entire field of computational theory from the wrong angle. We assumed that more complex systems automatically meant better solutions, but Mr. Chen and his binary code have shown us that elegance often lies in simplicity, that sometimes the best way to deal with uncertainty is to break it down into a series of certainties. The professor's fourth appendage moved in what humans would recognize as a thoughtful tap against his primary sensory cluster. From now on, this class will cover both quantum and binary approaches. After all, the goal of advanced computing isn't to use the most complicated method, it's to find the best solution. As the students began filing out, many stopped to talk with Marcus, their various appendages and interfaces expressing newfound respect. The Arcturians invited him to join their computational study group. The Valaxians asked if he could help optimize their probability stream algorithms. Even the Zephyrians, usually so aloof, wafted closer to absorb some of his binary wisdom. The end-of-term ceremony at the Galactic Institute of Advanced Computing was usually a formal affair, with students receiving their quantum certification chips while professors droned on about computational excellence. This year was different. Professor Zixthrax stood at the podium, his skin glowing with an unprecedented mix of colors that made the archival system struggle to record the moment properly. Distinguished faculty, honored students, and esteemed guests, I stand before you today to acknowledge a significant oversight in our computational curriculum. The assembled crowd buzzed with various forms of communication as the professor activated the quantum holographic display. Instead of showing the usual complex equations, it displayed a simple binary sequence. 010101000111010111010100011000000. This, he continued, his fourth appendage gesturing dramatically, is the word truth in binary. Simple, elegant, and until recently, something I would have dismissed as primitive. I was wrong. The display shifted to show Marcus's solution, now famous throughout the institute. A human student taught me that true computational excellence isn't about having the most advanced technology or the most complex methods. It's about finding the right approach, even if that approach seems deceptively simple. The curriculum changes were announced next. Binary computing would become a mandatory subject, taught alongside quantum theory. The institute would establish an entire department dedicated to studying and developing hybrid computational methods that combine the best of both approaches. Furthermore, Zixthrax announced, his skin pulsing with academic excitement, Mr. Marcus Chen has agreed to lead a special seminar next term on binary optimization techniques. I expect every faculty member to attend. His skin flickered with what could only be described as a smirk, even those who think they're too quantum for zeros and ones. The impact rippled through the galactic academic community. Other institutions began incorporating binary studies into their programs. Research papers started appearing with titles like Binary Solutions to Quantum Problems and The 0-1 Approach to Multidimensional Spacetime Calculations. The Arcturians developed a new form of crystal computing that used binary decision trees to optimize their neural networks. The Valaxians discovered that binary flags could prevent consciousness fragmentation during complex calculations. Even the Zephyrians found that binary states helped them maintain molecular cohesion during high-level computations. But the most profound change was in how the galactic community viewed human intelligence. No longer were humans seen as the primitive species that had stumbled into space travel. Their computational history became required reading, studied alongside the great quantum theories of other civilizations. As the ceremony concluded, Professor Zixthrax approached Marcus with an official document. The board has approved your research proposal for exploring binary solutions to grand unified field theory. You'll have full access to our quantum computing facilities, though. His skin rippled with amusement. I suspect you'll barely need them. Marcus accepted the document with his characteristic smile, then pointed at the quantum holographic display. Professor, you might want to check your binary translation. You've got a bit flip in the third byte. Zixthrax's skin went transparent for a moment as he rushed to correct the error. When he returned, he found Marcus grinning even wider. There was no error, was there? Binary lesson number 1, Professor, Marcus laughed. Always verify your data, even if you think you know it's wrong. The professor's skin cycled through a range of colors before settling on the particular shade of blue that his species used to express appreciation of a well-executed joke. You do realize this means I'll have to make the final exam twice as challenging? No problem, Marcus held up his datapad. I've already written a program to handle that. Would you like to see it? It's quite simple, really. Just a few million zeros and ones. Zixthrax's fourth appendage tied itself into a knot, and for the first time in his long teaching career, he laughed out loud in front of his students. The sound was so unexpected that 3 Zephyrians condensed into liquid form out of shock. As the laughter subsided, the professor looked at his human student with all 4 optical clusters. Mr. Chen, I believe this is the beginning of a very interesting academic partnership. Just promise me one thing. What's that, Professor? Never tell me how many binary calculations it really took to solve that 13-dimensional problem. Some things, I believe, are better left uncertain. Deal, Marcus nodded, already typing something new into his datapad. Though I should mention that solution, it was actually my backup plan. The first version was much more complicated. The professor's skin went completely transparent again, and somewhere in the quantum computing lab, 3 servers spontaneously rebooted themselves in what could only be described as computational sympathy.